Okay, so tonight, the diagram, this part of the diagram is called Stepping Above Limitation. And we will begin. So again, the diagram that's been reworked. And just a quick review. So we started the first talk with a sitting meditation. The basis of the sitting meditation was trying to get to that feeling of unity, feeling that we could be expansive or expand ourselves in space and time. And along with that too, the states of consciousness. And we had talked about working the states of consciousness as far as paying attention or being aware of what we do physically, our sensations, and being aware of our emotions or our feelings, and being aware of our thoughts. So it's not just automatic that these things are coming and going, but to be aware of them and see how they affect what we do in our daily life. The first acquisition and the first deprivation talked about this substratum of memory that carries that memory of unity with it. And also that once we can access that, or clear away the stuff that's keeping us from accessing who we truly are, then that's where courage comes from. And that courage is a higher order virtue. And then the deprivation part is, and this is my new mantra that I say more than once a day now, is a constant refusal to think the reality of. Whatever's going on, whatever I'm not liking, I'm constantly trying to refuse to think the reality of. And this one was that basically we are not the body and the mind, we are much more than that. And then the second acquisition and the second deprivation talked about the state of mind of equanimity. And that our body has many likes and dislikes. We have very many judgments on things. Sometimes our minds are like that teenager mind where I'm sure I don't like this. I've never tried it, but I'm sure I don't like it because it's a little off or a little different from the pattern that I'm used to. Once we can realize what our bodies are doing in relation to that, hopefully we can break this pattern, we can break these habits and access some of that equanimity that's out there. Anything to add? Okay. Okay, so stepping above the limitation, our lower nature, as HPB has said many times, is limited. It's limited by the very nature that we're in the physical world. So just three things I want to go over before we read the quote. One is that we need to be aware that we're only a fragment of this higher self. And the way that I remembered that was if we identify with all that we are here, we're losing so much of what we really are. In the example, I think Pablo's given it before, that if you take a magnifying glass, it magnifies a specific ray of the sun, and we can see that ray. So that ray is who we think we are, but we forget that really we're the whole sun. And usually that little ray is used for like burning leaves or making ants run away. If we think all that we are is that little ray, we're missing out on the part that says that, you know, we're the light that gives life, we're the light that gives light to the whole world, okay? So that was one thing I want to express, is that we are more than just this fragment or just this ray. And then the second one is that throughout this process, it seems like as we learn more, we know more. And that idiom, ignorance is bliss, has a whole lot of meaning in there, because it seems like as we get as we watch our dislikes and likes, I've noticed that I dislike and like everything. I have a judgment on everything. I have very little equanimity. And I'm also more sensitive to that. So when I know that that is part of the process that I just have to go through to get to that equanimity, then I can kind of just understand it a little more and follow it through. And then the third thing, this journey that we're on, this spiritual journey, for me it seems like, and we've talked before about it, that we're at the teenager stage. Once again, if I go back and think of my 16-year-old, if I think that that's all he is and that's all he's going to be in his whole life, I am really worried about him. But if I can just take a step back and realize that this is a stage that he's going through, that there's so much more out there that he can do, and that, and feel comfortable with, he can become a lot more than this teenager self, then I can sit back and kind of not worry as much. But the same thing with myself. Is this journey that I'm on is a stage. I'm at a stage right now, and all I have to do is keep working, and hopefully I'll get to a bigger, wider, more united space. Okay, so I'll read the quote, and then I'll let Pablo get talking here. In its own inherent nature, or essence, the higher ego is omniscient, for it is part of the divine mind. But once that it has been brought to incarnate on earth, it takes up all the materiality and all the finite attributes, so to say, and the qualities of the personalities it incarnates in. And moreover, these personalities are subject to the imperfections of the material form.
So the idea of the higher ego is like the technical way in which the Theosophical teachings talk about this higher, in the sense of more impersonal, more universal sense of I-ness. The word ego comes from the Greek ego, which simply means I-ness. So there can be a spiritual I-ness, which means it's a sense of being in which there is not real separation, or there can be a material or a lower I-ness, which is the one that feels I am this and I am separate from all of you. So the idea of the higher ego is this spiritual I-ness, which is what normally we could call the soul that incarnates and animates the personality. And the personality is this bundle of sensations, emotions, thoughts, memories, which do not really belong to the soul. They belong to the matter that we are made of. My body has a particular constitution that may make it lazy or hyperactive, sensitive or dull. Those are not qualities of the soul. The soul is beyond that. There is this particular body as a result of previous causes, and also probably there is a reason why the body is the way it is, but the soul is beyond that. Same with the emotions. The soul has nothing to do with my particular emotional makeup. I may be peaceful or more prone to anger or to depression or to enthusiasm. That is a quality of the emotional body that the soul is animating. And the same with the mind and the kind of thoughts we have, the kind of intelligence we have, etc. So Blavatsky is saying there that the soul, on its own plane, in its true nature, is omniscient. It can realize the reality of anything that comes into its own perception, on its own plane. But when the soul is animating this personality, it gets caught in the limitations of the personality. And one of the things that happen, one of the more difficult aspects of this process is that the soul loses the awareness of its true nature. So part of the spiritual path is to regain the awareness of what we really are, in spite of the limitations that we as the soul, and even the soul is a fragmented expression of something more than we are, but let us concentrate on that level. So I was saying that the journey is, part of it is for the soul to realize its true nature, even when expressing through the limited personality. But as we are going to see, in order to do this, the soul has to first break the illusion or the limitation or the identification that says, I am this, and I am nothing else but this, Pablo, this personality.
The normal state of consciousness must be molded by the perception in all embodied beings of limitation only. From this arises criticism without praise or blame. And here, Blavatsky for criticism means discernment, not as we take criticism. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, we are going to see. So remember the first acquisition was, these acquisitions are like states of consciousness or concepts that we have to cultivate, because those concepts open the door to a deeper perception. The concept itself is not the truth, but because they are more in tune with the truth, they can open the door to the perception of the truth. So the first acquisition was to have this sense of being more than the body and the mind, and we as consciousness pervading everything. So the second acquisition was to see that there is no distinction between foe and friend, that we are not limited to the physical body. And then the third acquisition has to do with realizing that everything that we see around is not the real self of people. What we see around is a limitation of the real self. As much as our physical body, our personality, emotional and mental too, is a limitation of the real. So when we relate to each other, if we can keep that perception that the person, we are relating to a shadow of the real person, we can relate to people in a very different way. We can understand, not only to people but to ourselves too, that there is a consciousness there trying to express through a lot of limitations, and then we can say this action is wrong or this action is right if it is necessary. That's why Blavatsky says there can be a criticism, again in the sense of an assessment of the situation if it is necessary, but without putting into that a condemnation or saying this person is guilty of this, because we can realize that it is the way it is. The consciousness is limited intrinsically when expressing through the personality.
What we're doing now is there's one acquisition and 3 deprivations. And
that we are going to go through
that we are
tonight.
going to go through tonight. Because you can see, if you see on the diagram, there's 3 acquisitions and there's 5 deprivations. The last 3 deprivations kind of fit into one bundle, so that's what we've done here. But there's really no new concepts that we go over. Madame Blavatsky kind of is now really pinpointing or honing in on this idea of that we're unity, we're not the personality, to tap into our higher self. So when we read through this, we may not have a lot of comment, but really listen to the quotes because they'll help fill in the concepts. So the Mahachohan says here, why has this struggle become the almost universal scheme of the universe? We answer, because no religion, with the exception of Buddhism, has hitherto taught a practical contempt for this earthly life. Teach the people to see that life on this earth, even the happiest, is but a burden and an illusion, that it is but our own karma, the cause producing the effect, and not a personal God, that is our own judge, our savior in future lives, and the great struggle for life will soon lose its intensity.
So this seems or sounds harsh, especially to the Western ear, and this is why Buddhism was normally seen as a nihilistic or negative religion, because there is the idea, the first thing that the Buddha said when he got enlightenment is life is suffering, and no matter what you do in life, you will encounter suffering. So we say, oh, that's very pessimistic. Well, point out to one person that can live without suffering, unless that person is enlightened. And again, the relation with suffering changes, but you cannot avoid it. So the idea here, even though it seems pessimistic, is actually giving the key to relate to suffering in a completely different way. When we go to a theater and we watch a movie with very high expectations, then the movie will disappoint us. But if we go with no expectations, even more, if people say it's not a really good movie, and we go thinking that probably it's not a really good movie, many times we are surprised. We live in life with the opposite attitude. We expect life to be great, the whole universe going around us, everything going on the way we want it. And we have such high expectations that when even little things, annoyances happen, we suffer and we don't understand why. This was in the West, this was very much emphasized by the Stoics, for example. They would say, if you know beforehand that is what life is, there will be suffering, struggle, and this, then when that comes, you are not surprised. There is a person that is aggressive. You know the person is aggressive. You relate to the person is aggressive, and then you are surprised. I think it was Marcus Aurelius that was talking about this. So whose fault is it? You know that the person is aggressive. Why are you surprised at all? If you relate to that person, knowing that that is the way it is, well, when the person expresses its own nature, you can take it in a different way. So now that's one part of it. But the other part of this quote is that when we realize that what we are looking for cannot be found merely on a physical, emotional, and mental existence, then we begin to let go of that. If you cling to a toy, thinking that the toy is going to make you happy, and you are growing up, and you are a teenager, but you are still stuck in the idea that this toy, because it made you happy when you are a kid, it has to make you happy, you cannot move on. So when you begin to realize that what we really look for, this peace and happiness that we all are looking for, cannot be found in the way that we are looking for, then we start losing our grip on life, on the material plane. And as we lose the grip, then we begin to enter into this state of happiness and peace and harmony, which belongs to the spiritual consciousness. We may have to work in the world and relate to, but because we are not looking for satisfaction in the world, then the door is open, we empty the cup so that something else can come from above, which is what really will bring us happiness.
Okay. Soar beyond illusions, search for the eternal and the changeless Sat, mistrusting fancies, false suggestions. This was from the Voice of the Silence.
Yeah, and Sat is a Sanskrit word for the real self. So again, you see the same idea.
Learn to distinguish the God in everyone and everything, no matter how evil he or it may appear on the surface. You can help your brother through that which you have in common with him, and that is the divine life. Learn how to arouse that in him. Learn how to appeal to that in him. So shall you save your brother from wrong.
So the whole idea here is we relate to each other in a world of illusion. Not illusion because it's not real. Illusion because our perception of it may be wrong. For example, if you relate to you don't know a person, and somebody tells you that this person is terrible, and tells you all these stories, and you relate to that person with that idea in your mind. You will relate to that person with fear, with caution, you will close up, because you have a wrong idea of what the person is. The person may be completely different. So you are living in an illusion, or you are relating to an illusory person, even if the person is there. So the same with life. The concept that we have of life and the expectations are not true. So we live in an illusion. We relate to a very superficial aspect of each one of us. we relate to life in a very superficial way. If we can see that all that is illusion, as the acquisition says, that everything that you are relating to is a limited expression of the real, then you can start trying to distinguish the real behind people, behind situations. It is only when you understand that the expression is limited that you can start looking for the real behind. And that's what Krishnamurti is saying there in At the Feet of the Master.
I'm very grateful to have been able to do these 4 talks, because for the last 4 weeks, all my extra energy and time has been going into reading the quotes and listening to other talks and reading articles. And so I've really noticed a lot of this stuff in regular life. For example, when I get to that state of boredom, I always turn to my iPhone and I'm like, oh, I'll check Facebook. And so as I check Facebook, I notice how, like Pablo was talking about the superficiality of life, how people's photographs and their whole lives are on Facebook, and they look so nice, they look so happy, and I found myself going, why can't I have a family like this, or why can't I take pictures like that? And I really had to stop and catch myself and go, oh, okay, I need to look at this a little bit less. Because that's what we do. We think our life is a song or a play or a country western movie. So we think it's those things, and then like Pablo said, we get disappointed when we don't know what hit us.
Yeah, actually, there is a study in one university here in the U.S. They did a study on that, and they saw how the social media produces sadness and depression in people, because everybody's portraying like a fantasy, in the sense that you are picking up, certain moments, and people feel that. People feel the contrast, or when you post it, and then you see the contrast between your life, because we try to generate this fantasy of life is everything, easy, smile, everything goes the way you want it, everything is great. And then that itself produces the sorrow.
All right, and then the other point I wanted to make, and I hope I haven't said this series of talks, was I think what happens now that I'm a little more older and mature is that in our 20s, we're so grateful to be out of our parents' house that we think we can do anything, throw any problem at us, any situation, and we'll just kind of stumble through almost blindly and come out the other side okay. And then we get to our 30s and we've started a career, or we started a family, or we've got really involved in something. And that energy just keeps us going. We can't even pick up our head per se to see what's going on. And then in our 40s, we're kind of still muddling along, figuring things out, thinking we have a little less energy than we did when we were in our 30s, but everything's still kind of okay, and we've still got our eye on the goal of whatever the goal is, the American dream, whatever you want to call it. And then we hit our 50s, and we start to get a little more tired. And we start to notice that either our career isn't what we thought it was going to be, or our family isn't exactly what we had pictured them to be, or we're taking care of career, family, and parents, and we're absolutely exhausted. And then all these other little problems that came up that started in our 20s that keep coming up in just a different form, it just like whacks us in the head. And we're dumbfounded, and we're like, how did we get here? Why is it like this? I never saw this coming. And when we don't have something that's deeper or wider or higher to grab onto, I think we get lost. And I think we think we've been so disillusioned by then. So I'm hoping, since I'm not there yet, that the 60s and 70s and 80s will be more of that equanimity. Don't tell me anything different, because I don't want to know.
Obviously, all that depends on how one is. There are many people that go through all that without having the feelings you are describing, because the problem with there is one stage in the path that is mainly struggle, and that is when the satisfaction that you can get from the outside doesn't really quench your thirst. Before you know, before your awareness is, let's say, more mature, eating good food and watching good movies, drinking good, that is enough for you to be happy in those moments. Very basic, simple pleasures are enough, and life can provide that. Of course, you will have still problems and suffering, but on the other hand, you get these simple pleasures that generate a state of happiness. Now, when consciousness begins to lose the meaning, or begins to see that those things per se are meaningless, then consciousness is there without being able to grab that and to stand on that kind of life, but it's not still beyond. So in that stage of the path, in which most of us probably are, that's why we are searching and looking, then there is this experience. And it's part of the process. Eventually, as we work, we get closer to a state of non-conflict or non-frustration, because we transcend that state of conflict. But that is part of the spiritual path. And, it depends on what we do. And some people get to the end of their life with struggle, and some people get happy, yeah.
All right, so the third deprivation, a constant refusal to think of reality of possessions, resulting in absence of greed, selfishness, and ambition. And here we go. Okay, how then can it be thought possible for a man to enter the straight gate of occultism when his daily and hourly thoughts are bound up with worldly things, desires of possession and power, with lust, ambition, and duties, which, however honorable, are still of earthy? Earthy? Mm-hmm. That's not a typo, huh?
No.
Okay.
I think it's a sentence they use.
Okay.
In that century. So this is not, the idea here is not that obviously we need some possessions, we need to have a career, or we may not according to how our life developed, but we need all that. But if we are searching for happiness in having all this, then obviously we are not looking into spirituality, because you either are looking down or up, so to say, or up and down, you go back and forth. But it's just, she's quoting with the straight gate what Jesus said. And also Jesus, when he said you cannot serve, the Father and the Emperor or the Caesar, that doesn't mean that you cannot live in the world. But if you are in love with the Caesar, if you are in love with all this, then that is what absorbs your attention. So the first thing is to fall out, from these kind of pursuits, and we are going to see other quotes about that.
Your needs are unreal and your efforts are meaningless. You imagine that your possessions protect you. In reality, they make you vulnerable.
If you think about that, that's very true. I mean, the more we have, the more fearful we are that we are going to lose it. The more we have, the more open mouths are there that we have to give energy and to keep going. Possessions, instead of protecting us, they demand that we have to keep them alive, to keep them growing, to keep them, because the law of life is for things to be impermanent, for things to begin and end, for things to break. So the more we have and the more we are attached to what we have, the more vulnerable we are.
Just think of your iPhone.
Yeah,
Yes.
think of your iPhone, and I was actually thinking of that a few days ago, how all the digital stuff and technology is the perfect children of our age. Because in the past, when somebody wanted to build something, the idea was to build something that would last. Something that was good is something that would last. Now, the economic system that we have now is based on things not lasting. Actually, I read that they have a problem with the iPads because people are keeping them for too long and they are not buying new ones. And that is a problem for Apple, that they are not selling more iPads. So the idea is that if we get with the materiality of things in this culture, the whole system is so that you have to always keep up with the new things. Because the iPhone, no matter how much you take care of it, after a few years, you just cannot use it. The software doesn't work. And the same with computers and many other things.
And then remember, on the physical plane, if I have some, you have less. And on the spiritual plane, if we have some, then we all have more. So what was it? The possessions on the higher plane multiply and unite. And when we have possessions on the lower plane, it separates and divides.
Yeah, possession in the sense, the more love you have, the more you are producing love around. If you are a loving person, you stimulate that in others. But the more possessions you gather, obviously, you are taking it from somebody else. And countries that are wealthy, as we said before, as these and other countries, they actually use far more resources in the world from the poor countries. And that's the way it is. You know, the resources are limited. So what Michele said, on the physical plane, gathering means depriving others. On the spiritual plane, gathering or possessing means multiplying that.
And then Madame Blavatsky, this next quote, talks about possessions, because as soon as we hear possessions, my mind automatically goes to something physical to hold on to. But it's more than that. She says here, the reference to possessions does not mean mere money alone, but also their ideas, their private thoughts, their mental forces, powers, and faculties, their psychic powers, all indeed on all planes that they own or have.
Yeah. And we can have thoughts and beliefs as possessions, and if you challenge them, it's like if you are challenging or trying to steal something from me, and I will defend it, and I am identified with my possessions, my idea of myself, of my career, of my name, possessions can be on any level.
Okay, desire possessions above all, but those possessions must belong to the pure soul only, and be possessed, therefore, of all pure souls equally, and thus be the especial property of the whole only when united. Hunger for such possessions as can be held by the pure soul, that you may accumulate wealth for the united spirit of life, which is your only true self.
So that's what we were saying about love, wisdom, all these things.
And then the last one from Light on the Path is kill out ambition, work as those who are ambitious. And then I just wanted to add, when we're talking about possessions before we talked about killing, that I remember when I was going through a course about philosophies. And I remember what struck me was many philosophies or philosophers had ideas about not owning things, that we shouldn't own our home, that if we own stuff, it just creates strife in the world. I know that was, I think, one of Plato's. Marxism with communism has that idea. And I remember listening to in Thomas More's Utopia. He wrote this story, and he went so far as talking about we shouldn't stay in our house for more than 2 years. I mean, in Utopia, they didn't get to stay in their house for more than 2 years. They had to move. Can you imagine all the stuff we wouldn't have if we had to move every 2 years? So, and that from a practical sense, that makes perfect logic. So, well, no, I don't mean the not owning things, but I mean because I don't want anyone to think I'm talking about communism in case McCarthyism is still out there. Sorry.
I think it's a material solution to a spiritual problem. I don't think it works.
Oh, okay. Well, no, there's
that's a material solution for a spiritual problem. Yes, well, that's what communism tried to do. Now, if you read more as what Michele was talking about, he said the idea was there was an island, and the people in this island lived in this utopia. And he said, because people didn't love possessions, or because people loved more the free time than the possessions, they could work only 4 hours a day, and the rest of the day use it to cultivate themselves in arts, philosophy, religion. But that was possible because they were not in love with possessions. So they need really little. And then with everybody working 4 hours, it was enough to have what they needed. So in that sense, that would be a utopia based on a spiritual maturity. It's not like in communism that somebody's forcing you to do it. You know, when you try to force, you never get anything real. But in this utopia, people were mature enough to willingly live in that way. And that's how many religious communities live. You know, all religious communities around are communist, but in the sense that they willingly say, why do I have to own things? We can share. I don't need to own this. Of course, certain things are necessary.
And we have those intentional communities everywhere. I mean, the Theosophical Society is an intentional community here, where I remember when I first came here, there's a vehicle for the staff, the residential staff to use, so you don't have to own your own car. You know, you don't have a lot of possessions in that sense. So I think what the Theosophical Society, and then also many of these intentional communities are having, is they're planting seeds for the way that we can live in the future. The mass of humanity doesn't have that maturity, that spiritual maturity to do it, but we can sure, you know, try in spots here and there. I know one of the intentional communities has a store that when you're done using something, you bring it there, and if you need something, it's like a free store. You just go and take what you need and bring what you don't need, and it just goes back and forth. So those types of things are things that we, you know, can look forward to.
And in Europe, in several countries, and also I know they are doing it in Argentina too, this system with the bicycles, that there are places where there are bicycles, you go there, you grab one, go wherever you have to go, and then drop it in some other place. And it's working really well. So eventually that could be done with many things, with cars too, and with many other things. If people are mature enough, all these things can be done quite easily.
Okay, so remember, that deprivation was about possessions. Okay, this one, the fourth deprivation, is personality. A constant refusal to think of reality of the personality, resulting in absence of vanity and remorse. Okay, so we start with Mabel Collins again, Light on the Path. Not until the bonds of personality are loosed can the profound mystery of self begin to be seen. I'm just going to read these. 'Tis from the bud of renunciation of the self that springeth the sweet fruit of final liberation. From Collected Writings, one has to kill one's personality and its passions, to blot out every idea of separateness from the divine spirit in man, to become one of the eternal and absolute life and light, Sat.
Wait, before you go on. Okay, so you can see Blavatsky was also, always in her language quite strong. And actually, if you read any work on mysticism, most of them in their language are quite strong. And I think that part of it is so that it can, you know, when you say, yes, well, you have to transform, and then that opens the door for us to be complacent. I always remember there was a speaker that was talking about Jesus. And she said, why did Jesus have to die in the cross? And she says that she thought it was because when he was in the cross, as probably all of you know, he forgave people their sins. And he said, Father, forgive them because they don't know what they are doing. By the way, that is seeing the limitations in everybody and not blaming them. He saw that they didn't know what they were doing. Of course, at the mental level, they knew, but at a deeper level, they didn't know. If a person knew what an act of violence or aggression produces, not only in the world, in the person, but in himself, that person would never do it, or we would never do a wrong act if we really knew what that produces. So the thing is that we don't know. So this person was talking about when he was being killed, he forgave everybody. And she said, this shows the extreme commitment, because then we cannot say, oh, I'll forgive you if you are a follower of Jesus. You cannot say, oh, I will forgive you, but this is unforgivable. If you truly follow or try to follow Jesus' example, even being killed is forgivable from that point of view. So I think the idea is, with this strong language, the idea is to have, this uncompromising ideal. Then we do whatever we can. Again, if we bring in all the guilt part, then that defeats the purpose. But we have this ideal that is uncompromising. And then we understand that we are not there, but that is a direction, and we do our best, and that's all we have to do. Now, before we go to the next quote, I wanted to say that the idea here is that as long as we are in love with my idea that I'm Pablo, that I'm these thoughts, these emotions, and this body, then I cannot discover anything deeper, because I am protecting this. That's what we are always doing. If you observe during your day, even how in your mind plays are being played of defending ourselves, justifying ourselves, or being the hero in this situation, or winning the lower self is constantly trying to preserve itself. Why? Because it's not real. If it were real, nothing can destroy something that is real. But because the lower self is not real, it's an idea, then it has to be constantly supported, constantly rebuilt. So as long as we are in that process of keeping, it's like if it were sand and the sand is falling and we are constantly trying to keep the shape. As long as we are doing that, we cannot see that we are not the sand. So that is the idea behind this. And Nisargadatta will explain why this radical view, I think, that most mystical treatises take.
And so that's why I think that Blavatsky talks and mysticism talks so strongly about killing what isn't real, killing the personal part, because we can purify this and we can make them look better, but it's still that lower self. It's not part of that higher.
Yeah. Sorry, in the idea of killing, there is the idea of finality. Not necessarily when we say kill, is not with the idea of the violence behind, but the idea of death is the idea of finality. So that's why these mystic works talk about killing. It's just like if you are in a prison, it would say, destroy the prison, break through, break free. Not paint the prison, and paint a nice landscape, and put some, so that you are more comfortable in the prison. They would say, break through, break the wall. So that's more or less the idea.
And Nisargadatta says here, the conscious personal self cannot change fundamentally. It can only modify. Anything to change must pass through death, through obscuration and dissolution. Gold jewelry must be melted down before it is cast into another shape, but refuses to die cannot be reborn. What refuses to die cannot be reborn. That's what I was going to say too. The other strong words that you'll see are the obscuration, annihilation, and those kinds of things. And it sounds, our personal self is kind of shaken because it's a little bit worried about those strong words.
Now, the idea here is, just as Jesus said, you cannot be reborn in heaven if you don't die first. And most people thought of a physical death. When reading all this, we have to understand the meaning behind, not literally. But you can understand this better, I think, with the example of a dream. Suppose you are in a dream, and it's a nightmare, it's a bad dream, and you are caught in the dream, and somebody is chasing you, and in the dream, what do? You run, you try to preserve your life. So a sage gets into your dream, you are running and running and says, hey, wait, this is not real. Stop running. Let this thing kill you, and you will wake up to what you really are. And in the dream, you say, no way, why would I let that happen? But if it happens and you wake up, you have the whole relief of coming back to what you are and of the dream being over. So the personal self, when listening to this, has this fear because the personal self, just like your dream self, doesn't want to disappear. Even though the dream self is an illusion, it's a creation of the mind. Well, our personal self is a creation of the mind. When listen to this, he says, no way, I don't want to disappear. But the soul that is imprisoned in the personal self, when that personal self dies, disappears, there is this, what religions call liberation, nirvana, and every single person that went through this describes it as a eternal bliss, as a full love, as with all the best qualities that we know. So obviously, when the personal self dies, what is behind, what is real, is far better than anything that the personal self can try to be or attain. But we have that problem that is an inbuilt mechanism in nature that anything wants to preserve itself, even if it is an idea in the mind when we are dreaming. So when you see all this and you feel the personal self, shrinking from it, bring to your mind the idea of the dream and the ceasing of the dream.
Okay, so the third deprivation that we talked about was possessions. The fourth one was personality. And this fifth one is a constant refusal to think of reality of sensation, resulting in the absence of gluttony, lust, etc. Okay. In sensation, no permanent home can be found, because change is the law of this vibratory existence. That fact is the first one which must be learned by the disciple. Kill out desire for sensation, learn from sensation and observe it, because only so can you commence the science of self-knowledge and plant your foot on the first step of the ladder.
Before we go on, just see that sensations are not permanent, and that is the foundation of suffering, because we have a pleasant sensation with food, with people, with situations, with whatever, and we want it to last. And by its very nature, it cannot last. A sensation that is extended soon becomes pain, even physically. The nerves can perceive a certain kind of vibration, let's say, and at the beginning it becomes pleasure, but if that is made constant, it begins to hurt the nerves. So sensation by its very nature is impermanent and is constantly changing. So if we have this desire for sensations, we are in this roller coaster that will never produce a sense of poise and peace and harmony. So this is why we have to kill the desire for them, not kill sensation. Sensations will always come and go. But if we stop trying to cling to one, then we can observe the sensation and we can learn. And we can learn how to enjoy the sensations when they are pleasant and how to dwell in the sensations that are unpleasant with this poise and awareness. And they come and go while we remain behind stable. So this is what this deprivation is trying to talk about.
Sensations as such, however strong, do not cause suffering. It is the mind bewildered by wrong ideas, addicted to thinking, I am this, I am that fears loss and craves gain and suffers when frustrated.
Yeah, that again, if you experiment a little with this, if there is some sensation, the idea of this is hurting me produces most of the suffering. If you know that it doesn't hurt you, then there is no suffering. Sometimes, in many things in life, your body may be physically hurt by something, but if you are doing that with love, it doesn't produce sorrow. The body may be sore, but it doesn't produce sorrow. Even if you like adventure, and you are doing a sport, or you are climbing, a wall, and you fall, and it hurts, but you are excited because you are doing something you love. If you are falling when you are cleaning your house, that is far more, painful, because the mind sees that as an aggression, sees that as something that should not happen, that should not be there. So this is what this quote Nisargadatta says. The sensations themselves are not very powerful, but our mind invested in the sensations create a universe behind the simple sensation.
The spiritual ego reflects no varying states of consciousness, is independent of all sensation, it does not think, it knows, by an intuitive process only faintly conceivable by the average man.
So that is the idea that our true nature is beyond sensations. So we can watch them. When we watch sensations, we are positioning ourselves in the true nature that is beyond the reach of sensations. Not that they are not perceived, but they cannot really affect what we really are.
Okay, there at the bottom of the chart there is a note. Now, I think we reworded them here. It might be a little different. Rearranged it.
The note.
So the note, the way we're doing this here on the talk is these deprivations are produced by the recognition of their being the source of bondage, ignorance, and strife.
So that is the reason. Why should we let go of, or try to let go of all these things? The desire for sensation, the identification with the personality. The more we recognize how they are chains, how they keep us from what we really are, the easier it is to practice them. When we see that something is poison, then we just don't drink it. We don't have the need to drink it. When somebody says, well, this is poison, but it tastes so good, and you are not really sure, maybe poison or not, then you have to struggle. But when you see something is bad, then you don't touch it. So the idea is that we have to develop this wisdom by actually watching our life, watching ourselves, paying attention to what happens. We develop with this wisdom that naturally we recognize, I don't want this in my life. And even though the thing will keep happening because of the habit, we can let it go eventually.
And that's what that substratum to me is. It's that place where it just knows, like in the last quote we read. All right, so Damodar says here, the desires, who was a disciple or a Chela,
Early Theosophist.
The desires and passions are, so to say, chains, real magnetic chains, which bind down the mind to these earthly carnal enjoyments and appetites. And he who wishes to rise superior to the Maya, which pervades this world, must do so by breaking those adamantine chains which hold him a prisoner in this transient world. And Nisargadatta adds, all your problems arise because you have defined and therefore limited yourself. When you do not think yourself to be this or that, all conflict ceases. And we have to remember that our vehicles are there for us to use, to get us from here to there, and they're not, and that we are not the vehicle. All right?
Yeah, so again, like what we said last week, we have to begin with simple things. We cannot all of a sudden stop needing things that we think we need. So when you see these things, understand it. You see that many desires, having these many desires, are keeping us prisoners, and start cutting off the things that are more superficial in your eyes, and start working on that. And the things that are important to you, you don't necessarily have to enter in conflict and guilt because you cannot give it up. Begin to watch it. Begin to watch it and see the effect in the present, the sensation that produces, the feeling of security or whatever it is, and then see what that feeling produces in the future, in the past. Begin to study it. And then as you see that something may not really be good for you, that natural understanding produces the detachment. You don't have to be violent with yourself trying to rip you apart from something. understanding, as Jesus said, the truth will set you free. So when you see the truth in something, if that something is not healthy or real, that very perceiving it will lose the grip that we have on these things.
Okay, the second part of the deprivation says that these are produced by the perpetual imagination of I am without, possessions, etc., without self-delusion. There is no risk of self-delusion if the personality is deliberately forgotten.
So this is an exercise, the idea, always keep in mind that your real nature is this pure awareness without a body. You are using a body. But when the body is gone, you are still there. So your awareness is without the emotions. You are using the emotions. But in the afterlife process, when the emotions are taken away from the soul, you as a soul are still there. And the same with the thoughts until you get to your real nature. So there is this exercise that you can say you are without sensations, you are without the possessions, to generate this idea that you exist without needing anything in particular from the outside. And that doesn't make you self-centered. On the contrary, when you are not needy, you can be loving. If you think that you need things from the outside, you will have impositions on life. And then she says, without self-delusion, because you can say, oh, I don't need anything, I'm God, I'm the Buddha, and then you are fooling yourself because in your daily life you are attached to everything. So if you are doing this spiritually and not just as a way to make for self-aggrandizement, then there is no risk that you will fool yourself.
Okay,
I think Ed wants to.
Oh.
Yeah, just a comment. You don't have to see yourself without these things. You can just notice that those things come and go. So if you identify with a sensation, notice the sensation comes, and after it goes, you're still around. And that's true about everything that we identify with. When we go to sleep, the body disappears. We're still around. When we have an emotion that overcomes us, it comes and goes, and we're still around. So that which, goes through all these experiences are not any of those experiences.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. And then this part I thought was important, was design your own diagram. Pablo came up with an idea at the end of a talk that he gave in Crotona, was to come up with acquisitions that you think you should cultivate. And then what deprivations do you need to kind of constantly refuse to think the reality of in there. And the idea, once you do this, I was thinking is that when I started thinking about, why do I get angry at this or why do I get frustrated at this, if I really keep thinking about it and watching my habits and everything, I notice that it's usually not because of one thing. It's usually an accumulation of different things, and if I can follow the thread back far enough, I can usually find out what that thing is that's driving me crazy. So, design your own diagram is from this general note here, that all the possessions and virtues, all the passions and virtues interblend with each other. Therefore, the diagram gives only general hints.
So that's what is Blavatsky saying, this diagram is not a revelation from the divine that you cannot modify. This is an example. All these things we are one unit, and we are looking at different aspects in order to be able to work on ourselves. But then you can redesign the diagram, as Michele said, according to the qualities of your own personality in particular.
Okay. And these two quotes I really liked, so we did some searching, or Pablo did some searching so I could find them. So they're both, first one's from the Key to Theosophy. Earnest aspirants have to bring their divine self to guide their every thought and action, every day and at every moment of their lives. The one self has to forget itself for the many selves. What every man needs first is to find himself and then to take an honest inventory of his subjective possessions, and bad or bankrupt as it may be, it is not beyond redemption if we set about it in earnest.
So she's quoting somebody that said that. So the idea with the diagram is to examine ourselves and see, usually you can start with the weaknesses. What things you feel that are in the way to expressing your real self, your real nature, and that poise and joy. So you make an inventory, if you want, of the things that are in the way, and then you will begin to work on that as we are going to show.
Carry on a minute examination of one's lower self and its walk in life, or that which is called, in our phraseology, the Cella's daily life ledger.
So when you do this examination, you have to do it from the point of view that you are the pure consciousness. If we look at ourselves from the point of view that I'm the personality, then there is a feeling of guilt or inadequacy or I'm not able to. But we have to remember that the personality is a vehicle of expression of the soul. So the same way that if you have a horse that you use and you love that horse, you need to know the idiosyncrasies of the horse. You need to know how strong it is, how much it can take you. And you don't do it with a sense of punishment or condemnation. You just need to know how the horse is. So the same with the personality. You look at your personality and you say, this personality that I'm using to express myself has these qualities. Well, let us work on this. So if you do it from a higher perspective, you can do it objectively without these feelings of, whatever negative feeling.
Yeah, and that's it.
Okay, so let us explain a little how you can do it. The idea is that suppose that fear is a problem. You say, fear is a problem in me. So try to see, you have seen that the acquisitions and deprivations are like the opposites. So you work on trying to cultivate something that will counteract the fear and trying to realize that the cause of fear is an illusion. So remember, your consciousness must be molded by a sense of, courage, and you have to go through a constant refusal to think of the reality of whatever makes you afraid. So there is a process of examination and see if you can understand why you are afraid. The more you can go to the root, the more effective the exercise will be. But wherever you get, it will be useful. So you see that you are afraid, maybe because you are afraid of death, and you are afraid of just disappearing. So your acquisition would be to try to cultivate in your awareness the idea that you are beyond the body, that you are more than the body. So that would be the acquisition. And then the opposite, the deprivation, is every time that the thought of being limited to the body comes, you refuse to believe that is real. And then along with this, you can meditate and study why we are more than the body. So you study this subject. And every morning in the meditation, you can think for 10 minutes about what you study and try to perceive and understand deeply how you are more than the body. And then during your daily life, you try to keep this in mind. And every time that you have the fear, you realize it and you refuse to believe, that this thing can really affect you. So in that way, you can choose any number of qualities and try to see what would be the right attitude that will help you get out of that negativity, and then refuse to believe of the reality of that negativity. So if we had more time, we could do it here, but I think the idea is more or less clear. Start doing it. You don't need to write 3 acquisition. do it with one and practice it for a month, and then you will get the hang of it.
Right, and hopefully in that time you'll see some habits and maybe find that it's not fear of death, that is what, your problem is. It's
as you practice, your spiritual side, let's say, gets deeper and deeper, and you see the underlying causes that at the beginning you may have not seen.
okay.
So we hope that we know that there is a lot of information here. The idea why we webcast and record all this is that if you feel that this is a practice that can help you and inspire you, go back. You can watch the recordings online, and we are providing also the PowerPoints on my website. So go back and work on these things little by little, and we hope that this can help in your spiritual practice. So thank you everybody for being with us. Before that, we can go to question and answers and comments as usual.
While we were killing the personality and giving away our possessions and things like that, how do you avoid the leap to, suicide that seems to solve all these problems?
By studying and seeing that suicide, because we are not the body, then you kill the body and you find yourself still alive, now without a body, and then you are not really dead, because the idea is that there is an energy that keeps the soul attached to a body for an X amount of years. If we kill the body before that energy is exhausted, the soul is still stuck to the material realms, but now you don't have a body, and now you still have the desires that you had before, but then you cannot satisfy them. So it's really hard. It's like saying, if you are trying to quit smoking, you know that if suddenly you cannot smoke, you suffer. So imagine that all of a sudden you cannot satisfy any desire because you don't have a body anymore. So that is a kind of a harsh state of being. So it is true what you say, the idea of, and there have been philosophers that understanding partially all this, they say, well, it's not worth having a life with a body. And some of them have killed themselves. But then this is why study and a deeper understanding is necessary. And then you will see that far from, liberating yourself from the bonds of the body, you get yourself in more trouble, which eventually you get out of it. Like everything in life, we get into troubles and eventually we get out of it. But then, it's not an eternal damnation, but then it produces much more suffering. So understanding...
your troubles kind of follow you over anyway, don't really go away because you committed suicide.
Yeah.
Right. Anything else?
Many of these teachings were secret for a long time because they all can lead to a wrong attitude. Especially when these are given to people that are not mature enough to understand it in the right way. If they are earnest, but they don't understand it, they can do wrong things, like killing themselves, or okay, I have to abandon my family, and they abandon the family, and maybe, wife or children, and they are starving. And that is not what renunciation means, for example. That is not what... So the spiritual teachings as any piece of knowledge is dangerous if we apply it in the wrong way. So it's important. That's why in the Theosophical Society we always place emphasis on understanding and knowing, not because of an intellectual, pursuit, but because we need to understand these things so that we can practice in the right way.
So we had talked about our attitude towards the things that are pleasant or things that are unpleasant. And if we have a kind of an equanimity towards something that is unpleasant, it has less of an effect on us. So how does that affect us if we are here as the result of karma? We've got some effect that comes from some cause, and we're supposed to carry a certain amount of burden or a certain amount of weight or endure a certain amount of suffering, and now all of a sudden we change our attitude and we kind of sidestep it.
That is what karma wants. The reason, if we personify karma, but the reason why struggles come to us is so that we can let go of our wrong attachments. So if we do it right away, then we exhausted the karma. If we keep clinging to the same, then we keep generating the same karma until we let go. So I always remember Annie Besant said, there are two ways to grow, by wisdom or by suffering. By wisdom, if we can have this attitude, and as soon as karma is producing some suffering, we can perceive the cause of what the cause is behind, and we can change our attitude, then you exhaust the karma very fast through wisdom. If we don't have enough wisdom, then you do it through suffering. You get the hit until you realize it. So that is the purpose. The purpose is never just to suffer. It's not the punishment in that sense. Oh, you killed 10 people, you will have to be killed 10 times. Karma doesn't work in that way. The purpose behind is a realization. And as fast as you can realize something, even if there may be some physical karma left over, it doesn't really affect your consciousness. Do you want to add anything?
I was going to say, you said that we suffer less. I don't know that you suffer less. I would say you suffer maybe shorter, but to me, if karma is in the sense to get hit in the head with a baseball bat, that's going to hurt, regardless of what my realization is. But if I can realize that the reasons behind it, then I'm not holding on to that pain and that suffering, and therefore it's not growing a life of its own. So that's how I would look at that.
Obviously, karma and suffering and learning is very complex, and it requires a whole series just to understand a tip of it. Mm-hmm. But many times it is said there is some karma where what happens physically, there is no way that you can change it. You can change your attitude, and then that will exhaust the karma there. And that's what Michele is saying. Some things will happen, but when you can change the attitude, that is the end of it. What happens many times is that, for example, somebody is aggressive with you because of a cause that you generated. So if you keep responding with aggression, you are perpetuating the cause. You cannot help this person being aggressive with you, but you can cut the chain of causation if you can understand it and change your attitude. If you don't, then you are generating the same experience until you learn and you can let go. So there are some things that will happen and they will hurt, but with the right realization, you are stepping aside and won't happen in the future.
So
and there are some other
things. Turn the other cheek then, so to speak. So turn the other cheek, so to speak.
Yeah, well, each situation is different. Sometimes there are things that have to be stopped, but without a feeling of anger behind or revenge or, life is difficult. We cannot put fast rules, In some cases, yes, you have to bow your head and go through it. In some other cases, there may be within your power to stop something, but without the wrong feelings. If you do it, right. Killing somebody, to go to extreme, killing somebody out of love or out of anger would produce two completely different causes. Not that we can kill somebody out of love, but just to put, there is a story of the Buddha. The Buddha killed a person that was a murderer, and he killed this person because he was generating a terrible karma for the future. So he killed him out of love. Of course, we cannot use that excuse, but the idea is that what matters the most in karma is your inner attitude.
Well, if we're here, it's because we got to pay for some bad karma. So we're all together. None of us are any better than anybody else. We just have to suffer together here on this planet until we learn. Do you think there's... But it would seem sometimes that there's a lot more suffering than... the majority seem to be suffering so much.
Yeah, so yeah, once we lose that attachment, which we're now at a point where our spirit and matter are intertwined. And as that spirit and matter is intertwined, there's going to be some struggle or some vying for who's going to get on top. And as we do that, right now we're at a point where that's all there. It seems like that's all there is.
As humanity.
As a humanity.
Yeah, and also remember what the Mahachohan said in his quote. On this plane, for sure, there is more suffering than happiness. And that is what the Buddha said. Life, the embodied life, is essentially suffering. There is pleasure, there is happiness, but if you compare the physical life with all the dimensions of existence of the soul, this is the worst state of existence for the soul. As soon as the soul lets go of the body, when somebody dies by natural causes, not that they kill themselves, most of the suffering is left behind. And all this idea of heaven in all religions is because the life on the spiritual planes without the body is a life of harmony and happiness. And in the Theosophical view, we spend, say, 100 years on the physical plane, and then if the person is spiritual, can spend 1,000 years on what we could call heaven, in this state of happiness and harmony before a new incarnation. So if you see the whole existence of the soul, there is more happiness than suffering. If you see only the physical plane, there is more suffering than happiness in general terms. And because we only see this and we cling to this, then things are more difficult. And that's what the Mahachohan was trying to say. When we teach people or teach ourselves to see life in a wider perspective and to see that the physical life, even the happiest of them all, is a burden for the soul when compared to what the soul really experiences on the inner planes, then when you see that, you stop being so attached to the physical life. There is a purpose for the physical life. There is a purpose why the soul incarnates in a body. It's not that the physical life is worthless, but the very nature of the physical life has intrinsic the experience of suffering. If you want to climb a mountain, the climbing itself will produce suffering and exhaustion, and it's the nature of it. But it's necessary for you to enjoy eventually the view from the top of the mountain. So our experience in the physical plane is necessary for us to gain this full realization of our divine nature. But the part where we are incarnated in a body, that's the part where we are working hard, where we are exerting ourselves, where we are suffering. And then there is far more rest in our true nature after death than what there is in physical life. And eventually the two are united. That's the Buddhist idea, nirvana and samsara are one. Once you get an awareness of your true nature, even on the physical plane, you are beyond suffering and you are in this state of bliss. And that is where the spiritual life eventually leads the person.
If you look at the emblem of the TS and you go from the outside in, you have on the inside the two triangles that are intertwined, and those two triangles represent spirit and matter. And like I said, this is where they're intertwined. But if you go inside that, you see the Egyptian Ankh with the circle on top and then the cross on the bottom. And the circle represents that spirit and the cross represents matter. So we're working, if we go from the outside to the inside, we're working where spirit and matter are intertwined to a place where spirit rules over matter or rules over the bodies. And that's what we're working towards.